It started with something so small I almost laughed it off. A note taped to my front door written in sharp black ink. Violation. Immediate action required. At first I thought it was a mistake, but the next morning another letter appeared, then another. Soon it wasn't just paper piling up, it was threats, warnings, and fines for things I didn't even know could break a rule. My grass was too green, my trash bin is too visible. Even the color of my curtains somehow became a violation. And behind every notice was the same name, the HOA president who seemed obsessed with making my life miserable. But here's the thing, I wasn't about to back down. What they didn't know was that I had something powerful on my side, something they never expected. So when the final confrontation came, everything changed. Would you have fought back? When my wife and I first moved into Maplewood Estates, we thought we had finally found our haven. The neighborhood looked like something from a glossy magazine. Tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed hedges, and houses so uniform you'd think they'd been stamped out of the same mold. To outsiders, it was perfect. To us, it felt like a dream, come true. We had spent years scraping by in cramped apartments, dealing with noisy upstairs neighbors and praying for the day we could buy a place of our own. When the realtor showed us this house, 3 bedrooms, a wide porch, and a little patch of lawn out front, we felt like all our sacrifices had been worth it. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. At first, everything was wonderful. We made small improvements every weekend. My wife planted roses along the walkway, I painted the fence a brighter white, and we set up a swing on the front porch. Evenings became our favorite time. We'd sit outside with glasses of iced tea, listening to the crickets and watching the sun fade behind the rows of identical rooftops. The neighbors seemed friendly enough in passing. Smiles, waves, and polite, "How do you do?" greetings at the mailbox. We were careful, of course, to fit in. This was an HOA community, after all, and we'd heard enough stories to know that stepping out of line could cause trouble. Still, we didn't expect anything unusual. Rules are rules, right? For the first few months, it really did feel like a fairy tale. We even hosted a small barbecue, inviting a few families from down the street. Everyone showed up with casseroles and potato salad, chatting about schools, property values, and which lawn service offered the best deal. It felt normal, safe. But looking back, I realize now that the first warning signs were already there. There was a certain sharpness behind the smiles, a certain edge in the way people commented on things. Like the neighbor who complimented my wife's roses, then added casually, "Of course, red isn't always approved by the HOA." Or the man across the street who nodded at our porch swing and said, "Looks nice, for now." At the time, we brushed it off. We thought they were just making conversation. And then there was her, the HOA president. Everyone just called her Karen, though that wasn't actually her name. She had a way of appearing out of nowhere, arms folded, eyes scanning your property like a detective looking for evidence. She didn't talk much during our barbecue, but when she did, it was always with an air of authority, as though she were the gatekeeper of Maplewood Estates and we were lucky to be admitted. I still remember the first time she introduced herself. She knocked on our door the day after we moved in. Her smile was wide, but her tone was clipped. She handed us a thick binder, the community guidelines, and said, "Welcome to Maplewood. I'm sure you'll want to read this carefully. Everyone must contribute to maintaining our neighborhood's standards." We thanked her, of course, but there was something about the way she lingered on the word standards that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. At the time, we laughed about it. "Every neighborhood has one," my wife said. "The overzealous rule keeper. Just ignore her." So we did. For a while. The first few notices we received seemed minor enough. A reminder to keep our trash bins out of sight. A polite note about lawn height. It felt annoying, but manageable. Everyone had to follow the rules, right? We trimmed the grass, tucked the bins behind the fence, and went about our lives. But then the notes kept coming. One about the color of our curtains, claiming they did not align with the community's neutral aesthetic. Another about the porch swing, citing structural uniformity guidelines. My wife's roses were labeled unauthorized landscaping. Each message was signed by the HOA president herself. It was strange. Other houses had bright curtains. Other yards had swings and flowers and fences that weren't perfectly aligned. Yet we were the ones singled out again and again. We began to wonder, was it us? Did she have some personal vendetta against our family? Things escalated quickly. What began as reminders soon turned into fines. Little amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there, but they piled up. Every envelope carried a weight, not just financially, but emotionally. It felt like someone was watching us every second, waiting for us to slip up, and that's when the tension in our so-called paradise became impossible to ignore. Our neighbors grew quiet. Some stopped waving. Others avoided eye contact altogether. It was as though siding with us, even in small gestures, might put them in the HOA's crosshairs too. By the time we realized how serious this was becoming, it was too late. The HOA had made it clear. We weren't welcome unless we played by their rules. And their rules seemed to change depending on Karen's mood. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that we weren't the kind of people to roll over and give in. We had worked too hard to build this life, too hard to claim this home as ours. And if the HOA thought they could bully us into submission, they were in for a surprise. Because sometimes, when people push you too far, they awaken a strength you didn't even realize you had. And in our case, that strength was about to change everything. At first, the letters were just an annoyance, a tap on the shoulder, a reminder that someone, somewhere was keeping score. But then, they multiplied. Week after week, we opened our mailbox to find fresh envelopes stamped with the HOA seal. Some were thin slips of paper with reminders. Others came in thick stacks, fines, warnings, and even threats of further legal action if we didn't comply. The absurdity of the rules was almost laughable. One notice accused us of improper waste receptacle visibility because our trash bins had been visible for precisely 12 minutes after pickup. Another claimed our holiday lights were hung with unauthorized clips that weren't on the approved vendor list. My wife's roses, her pride and joy, were cited yet again, this time for being too vibrant in color and disruptive to the community's visual harmony. I remember holding that letter in my hands, staring at the words until my vision blurred. Roses, too vibrant. How could anyone take this seriously? But the fines were real. The balance added up like quicksand, dragging us deeper into a pit we hadn't asked to stand in. $100 here, $200 there. By the end of the month, we were staring at nearly $1,000 in violations, and every single one was signed in the same sharp handwriting, Karen, HOA President. It wasn't long before Karen's presence grew unavoidable. She didn't just send letters, she made herself known. She walked the neighborhood with a clipboard, jotting down notes in the middle of the day. If we were outside, she'd linger on the sidewalk, watching us like a hawk sizing up prey. One Saturday morning, while I was trimming the hedge, she stopped in front of our house. She didn't greet me. She didn't even smile. She simply tilted her head and said, "You might want to double-check the height on that. Our regulations are very clear." Then she scribbled something down and walked away. I stood there. Hedge, clippers in my hand, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about rules. It was personal. Things escalated from annoying to invasive faster than we could have imagined. A week later, we received a letter accusing us of violating a rule we didn't even know existed: unauthorized outdoor furniture. According to the HOA guidelines, every piece of visible furniture, chairs, tables, even the swing on our porch, had to be community approved. I thought it was a joke, but the fine was there in black and white. We asked around. None of our neighbors had ever been fined for their lawn chairs or porch benches. Some of them laughed nervously when we mentioned it, muttering, "That's just Karen being Karen." But when we pressed further, they clammed up, eyes darting toward her house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was like everyone was afraid of her. The strangest part came late one evening. I had just finished mowing the lawn when I noticed movement near our driveway. At first, I thought it was a neighbor walking their dog, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw Karen, standing there, notepad in hand, flashlight shining over our yard. She was inspecting our grass. At night, when she realized I was watching, she didn't even look embarrassed. She just gave a curt nod, as if to say, "Caught you," and walked away. The very next morning, we received a violation for uneven mowing patterns. That was the moment my wife broke down in tears. Sitting at the kitchen table, clutching the letter, she whispered, "I can't live like this. We're being hunted in our own home." And she was right. We tried to fight back at first. I sent polite emails to the HOA board asking for clarification. I requested to see the official guidelines behind these bizarre citations. Weeks went by with no response. When I finally got an answer, it was from Karen herself, cold and dismissive. All homeowners are expected to familiarize themselves with the guidelines. Ignorance of the rules does not exempt you from compliance. We weren't dealing with fairness. We were dealing with power, and Karen had plenty of it. The next blow came in the form of public humiliation. At the quarterly HOA meeting, Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse, clipboard in hand, rattling off updates about landscaping schedules and community events. Then, without warning, she cleared her throat and said, "We've had several persistent violations from one particular household. Everyone must understand that rules apply equally to all of us." Every head in the room turned. She didn't say our names, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. I felt heat rising in my neck as she listed off our supposed infractions: the roses, the porch swing, the bins. She framed it as if we were deliberately defying the HOA, as if we were bad neighbors tarnishing Maplewood's pristine reputation. The meeting ended with scattered murmurs and sidelong glances. We walked out feeling like pariahs in a community we'd once called home, but the worst was yet to come. A few weeks later, we received a certified letter in the mail. Inside was a notice stating that if we didn't pay the growing fines, now totaling over $3,500, the HOA had the right to place a lien on our property, our home. The place we had fought so hard to buy. The place where we thought we'd finally found peace. I stared at the paper in disbelief, my hands trembling. A lien meant they could eventually foreclose. They could actually take our house over roses, over trash bins, over nothing. That night, neither of us slept. My wife sat by the window, staring out at the streetlights, whispering, "What if we lose it all? What if this was their plan from the beginning?" And for the first time, I didn't have an answer. But here's the thing about being pushed too far. It changes you. The fear that had weighed us down began to shift into something else: anger, determination, resolve. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one. We started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every strange encounter. I set up cameras on the porch and driveway, capturing footage of her late-night inspections. My wife began researching state laws on HOAs, digging through case studies and legal forums late into the night. The deeper we looked, the more we realized. The HOA wasn't just unfair. Some of what they were doing was outright illegal. But before we could make our move, Karen made hers. One crisp autumn afternoon, while my wife was raking leaves in the yard, a police car rolled up to the curb. 2 officers stepped out. My wife froze, rake in hand, as Karen appeared behind them, arms folded smugly across her chest. The officers approached with cautious expressions. "Ma'am," one said, "we've received a complaint from the HOA about ongoing violations on this property. They've requested official intervention." My wife's jaw dropped. Karen had called the police, and in that moment, standing there, on our lawn, flanked by officers, our neighbor smirking in satisfaction, we realized just how far this war was going to go. The day Karen brought the police to our front yard was the day everything broke open. 2 uniformed officers stood in front of our porch, their eyes flicking from me to my wife to the smug woman who had dragged them here. Karen clutched her clipboard like a badge of honor, chin raised, lips curved in a satisfied smirk. "This property has violated multiple HOA rules for months," she announced, her voice sharp and commanding, as though she herself wore a badge. "We've issued notices, warnings, and fines. These homeowners have refused to comply. I am requesting official enforcement action." The audacity of it hit me like a punch. Enforcement? For roses? For porch furniture? For a swing? One of the officers turned to us, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, ma'am, is there truth to these complaints?" Before I could speak, Karen cut in. "They're habitual violators. They think they're above the rules. Our entire community has had to suffer because of their stubbornness." Her words dripped with venom, but behind her mask of authority I saw it. Fear. She wanted control. She wanted us broken. But she was afraid we weren't going to bow down. I took a breath and forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to explode, no matter how badly I wanted to. "Officer," I said evenly, "we've complied with every reasonable rule in this neighborhood. What Karen isn't telling you is that she's been targeting us personally. We have documentation. Every notice, every fine, every late-night inspection, and we've recorded video of her trespassing on our property to create violations that don't even exist." Karen's head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. "Lies! Complete lies! Don't listen to them. They're just trying to play the victim." "Typical." The officers exchanged glances. One raised an eyebrow. "You have documentation?" Without a word, I went inside and came back with a thick binder, hundreds of pages of letters, emails, and printed photos. I handed it to the younger officer, whose eyes widened as he flipped through the evidence. Then I showed them the footage from our porch camera. Karen, flashlight in hand, crouching in our yard at midnight with a tape measure. The silence that followed was suffocating. The older officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said slowly, turning to Karen, "we don't enforce HOA rules. That's a civil matter. Calling us here for this is a misuse of law enforcement resources." Karen's smug expression faltered. But they're—" "No, ma'am." The officer's tone was firm now, final. "You're wasting our time. If there are legal issues, they need to be settled in court, not by involving the police. In personal disputes." For the first time, Karen looked rattled. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. She just stood there, red-faced, clutching her clipboard like it could save her, but I wasn't done. Not anymore. "Actually, officer," I said, voice steady but burning with the months of frustration she had forced on us, "we are pursuing this legally. What Karen doesn't know is that we've already contacted an attorney. And as of yesterday, we filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority. This isn't just harassment, it's abuse of power. The color drained from Karen's face. My wife stepped forward, voice trembling but strong. We're done being bullied. We're not moving. We're not backing down. And if this HOA thinks they can take our home with fraudulent fines, we'll see them in court. The younger officer closed the binder and handed it back to me. He gave a slow nod, then turned back to Karen. You might want to get your own lawyer, ma'am, because from what I just saw, this doesn't look good. That was the moment the tide turned. Karen opened her mouth, shut it again, and stormed off down the sidewalk, her heels clicking like gunfire against the concrete. For once, she didn't have the final word. But the war wasn't over yet. The very next day, we received another letter, this time not from Karen. It was an official notice of a special HOA meeting to discuss disciplinary measures against us. Clearly, she wasn't giving up without one last show of force. When we arrived at the clubhouse that evening, the room was buzzing. Neighbors filled the chairs, some whispering, others staring at us like we were about to be put on trial. And, in a way, we were. Karen sat at the front, gavel in hand, papers spread before her like the judge of some twisted courtroom. This meeting, she declared, is to address the continued violations of the residents at 142 Maplewood. Their behavior has jeopardized the integrity of our community. We will now vote on whether to pursue foreclosure proceedings. Gasps rippled through the room. Foreclosure. She actually said it out loud. My hands shook, but I stood. Before anyone votes, I'd like to present evidence. I walked to the front and set down the binder. This, I said, flipping it open, is every violation notice we've received. Over 30 in total. Many for things that don't exist. Many of the rules that aren't applied to anyone else in this room. Here's proof of neighbors with the same so-called violations who were never fined. Here's video footage of Karen, trespassing on our property, committing infractions. And here, I held up a copy of the legal complaint, is documentation that we've already filed with the State Housing Authority, citing harassment, discrimination, and abuse of power. The room went silent. Karen tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered. This is nonsense. They're twisting facts. None of this means anything. But then one of the board members, a man who had barely spoken in all the previous meetings, raised his hand. Karen, is this true? She froze. Of course not, Because if it is, he continued, then you've exposed this entire HOA to liability. If they sue and win, we're all on the hook. Every homeowner here could end up paying for your actions. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Eyes that had once turned away from us now locked onto Karen with suspicion. And in that moment, the walls closed in on her. Neighbors began speaking up, quiet at first, then louder. Stories tumbled out. Others had received strange notices too, but they'd been too afraid to challenge her. One woman, Karen, had threatened to fine her for planting tulips. Another man said he was cited for a noisy garage door. It was like a dam breaking. By the time the voices settled, the board voted, not to foreclose on us, not to fine us further, but to suspend Karen's authority as HOA president pending a full investigation. Her face was crimson with rage as she slammed her gavel, muttering about conspiracies and ungrateful neighbors. But it didn't matter anymore. Her power was slipping through her fingers and everyone knew it. That night, when we walked home, the air felt different, lighter. For the first time in months, we weren't the ones under fire. But as I looked back toward the clubhouse, I saw her standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light. She wasn't done. Not yet. And I knew, whatever came next, this fight wasn't just about us anymore. It was about every neighbor who had been silenced, every family who had lived in fear of a clipboard and a threat. Karen had started a war, but now she wasn't just fighting us. She was fighting everyone. The night Karen was stripped of her authority, something shifted in Maplewood Estates. For months, her presence had loomed over every driveway, every garden, every porch light left on too long. People had whispered in fear of her clipboard, avoided eye contact when she walked past, and silently hoped she wouldn't choose them as her next target. But after the board meeting, after neighbors finally heard the truth laid bare, her grip on the community loosened. At first, it was subtle. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began stopping by again. A nod at the mailbox turned into a full conversation. A wave across the street turned into an invitation to sit for coffee. And slowly, we realized, people weren't just reconnecting with us. They were rediscovering each other. For so long, Karen had thrived on division. If everyone were isolated, if everyone feared being singled out, then no one would question her authority. But once that fear cracked, her power unraveled, faster than any of us expected. The investigation into her leadership stretched on for weeks. We stayed cautious, half expecting her to come back swinging with a new angle, a new accusation. But this time, the board kept her on a short leash. We attended every meeting, and at each one, more neighbors came forward. They brought letters, of their own, proof of fines and warnings that made no sense. One man had been cited for having his recycling bin angled improperly. Another woman had been fined because her wind chimes were audibly disruptive to the neighborhood's tranquility. By the third meeting, the truth was undeniable. Karen hadn't just been targeting us, she'd been targeting everyone. Some she went after harshly, others she controlled with subtle threats. But it was all the same: intimidation. The board had no choice but to act. The final vote was swift. Karen was officially removed from her position as HOA president. She was barred from serving on the board again, and the association hired an outside management company to oversee operations until trust could be rebuilt. When the announcement was made, the room erupted in applause. I looked around and saw relief on faces that had once been tight with anxiety. My wife squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt, but neither of us cared. We had won, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. The fines we'd been buried under, wiped clean, the lien threat, withdrawn. Every baseless violation was struck from the record, and in their place came something we hadn't felt in months: peace. But more than that, there was a sense of vindication. For all the humiliation, all the fear, all the nights we sat awake, wondering if we'd lose our home, justice had been served. Karen hadn't just been stopped, she'd been exposed, and that mattered more than any fine or fee ever could. Of course, Karen didn't go quietly. In the weeks after her removal, she became a shadow of the woman we'd once known. We'd see her pacing her driveway, phone pressed tight to her ear, ranting to whoever would listen. Some neighbors claimed she tried to rally sympathy, spinning herself as the victim of a conspiracy. Others said she threatened lawsuits of her own. But the truth was simple. Without the title of HOA president, she was just another resident. Her clipboard no longer carried power. Her words no longer carried weight, and for the first time in a long time, people stopped listening. I'll never forget the day she walked past our yard and didn't say a word. No glare, no sarcastic comment, no warning about standards. Just silence. And in that silence, I realized the battle was truly over. Life in Maplewood slowly began to feel normal again, but not the rigid, suffocating normal Karen had enforced. A real normal. Kids' bikes leaned against fences without fear of improper storage fines. Neighbors decorated their porches for holidays without wondering if their wreaths were HOA approved. Someone even painted their shutters a bright shade of blue, a bold act of rebellion that, a year ago, would have been unthinkable. Instead of resentment, there was laughter. Instead of suspicion, there was community, and in the middle of it all, my wife's roses bloomed brighter than ever. But the biggest impact wasn't on Maplewood. It was on us. When this all began, we thought we were just fighting to keep our home. But along the way, we discovered something deeper. We discovered the strength to stand up when it would have been easier to stay silent. We discovered the power of persistence when every letter, every fine, every humiliation told us to quit. And we discovered that one voice, when amplified by truth, can spark an entire neighborhood to rise together. Because once we spoke out, others found the courage to do the same. And that was the real victory. Not just removing Karen, but breaking the cycle of fear that had ruled Maplewood for years. Of course, there were scars. We still felt a flicker of unease every time we saw a new envelope in the mailbox. We still double-checked our lawn, our bins, our porch, habits carved deep by months of harassment. But over time, those reflexes faded. One evening, sitting on our swing as the sun dipped low, my wife looked at me and said, "You know, I think this place really can be home again." And I believed her. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what Karen was really after. Control? Power? A sense of purpose? Maybe all of the above. But in the end, none of it mattered. Because she forgot. Something simple. Something she could never take away. When people stand together, no single person can tear them down. We kept our home. We kept our dignity. And most importantly, we proved that even in the face of pettiness and abuse, integrity wins. So if you're watching this, and you're dealing with something similar, whether it's an overreaching HOA, a power-hungry neighbor, or anyone who thinks intimidation is strength, remember this. You don't have to bow down. You don't have to give up. You can fight back. Document everything. Speak the truth. And never forget that bullies only have power when we let them. Karen thought she could break us. But all she did was remind us just how unbreakable we really are. And in the end, she lost everything.